Hi, how's it going? I'm Luka, I'm your certified expert on trans issues for today. I want to talk to you about common misconceptions people often have about trans people because it's annoying as hell that it's 2022 and people still think these things. And also these are misconceptions that I had myself when I was a child or a teenager. I had this totally wrong impression of what the trans person is supposed to be like, and that also held me back from realizing I was trans at the time because I thought trans people are so weird, I can't be trans, when in reality I just never met a trans person or saw an accurate representation of a trans person in the media. Yes, so that's why it's important for me to talk about this. Let's dive right in. Number one is that trans people already know they're trans when they are little children. I'm trans. I'm pretty sure I am. And I didn't know when I was a child. I didn't even know when I was a teenager because, denial. Of course, that doesn't mean that there aren't people who already figure out they're trans when they're children, but every trans person's life and circumstances are different, so everybody's coming out story is also different, of course. I feel like a lot of trans people who are around my age, I'm 27 by the way, we kind of figured out that we're trans maybe in our early 20s or late teens, and I honestly think that this is because representation of trans people in the 90s or 2000s, it was so bad. It was either completely non-existent, just trans people, they don't exist, what is that? Or it was just really bad, trans people were shown to be these abnormal, crazy people, and for the longest time I thought that trans people were the same as drag queens, which is obviously not true, but the education was bad. So yeah, that's why I think a lot of trans people don't figure out they're trans when they're children. It also totally depends on the way you grow up, because when I was a child, I was just being a child. I wasn't thinking about acting like a boy or a girl, or my parents didn't care if I played with boys or girls' toys or wore boys or girls' clothing. It just didn't matter, so maybe that's why I also didn't bother thinking about that. Number two is that all trans people physically transition. Of course, a lot of trans people want to physically transition so that their outside appearance matches more what they feel like on the inside, but there could also be lots of reasons why trans people wouldn't want to medically transition, and that's also completely fine. There aren't any rules to being trans. If you feel like a guy, you're a guy. If you feel like a girl, you're a girl. If you feel like neither, you're neither. It's fine. And you don't have to medically transition to prove that to anyone. Obviously, society tends to be more accepting if you look more like the gender that you're trying to present as, but that's a whole other problem that I'm not going to talk about now. I just want to say that there are also many different ways in which you could physically transition. You can change your hair, you can change your clothes. I feel like that's a Hannah Montana song. You can go on testosterone, you can have top surgery, so you can remove your boobs. You can also have different kinds of bottom surgery, but I'm not going to go into detail now. You don't have to do all of them. You can literally pick and choose. It's your life. So not every trans person's transition process is the same. Number three is that all trans people are mentally ill and depressed. This is I struggled with this when I was younger and I watched trans documentaries. It was always about the struggle and how sad and helpless everything was. And I was always yeah, I feel bad about my body. I do experience dysphoria. I wish certain parts of my body were different. I definitely would feel more comfortable living as a guy in this society, but I'm not mentally ill. I'm not depressed. I feel sad sometimes, but I don't think I'm depressed. So I always had this thing in my mind oh, I don't feel depressed enough, therefore I can't be trans, which now I know is complete bullshit, but I was struggling. I was trying to find myself. When you're in denial about being trans, you just look for all possible reasons why you can't be trans, and this idea of not being trans enough because I'm not sad enough was definitely playing a big part. I think this whole idea of trans people being mentally ill comes from our health system, because here in Germany, for instance, and I think in a lot of other countries as well, first you have to go to a therapist and get diagnosed with being trans. I'm sure there's an official diagnosis name, but I can't think of it right now. Basically, we have the system where you can't get treatment unless you have a medical diagnosis first. And in the past it was also officially classified as a mental illness, but that's definitely outdated. I think also the World Health Organization changed it, it was removed from the list of mental illnesses. So I think it's good that the conceptualization of what we think of as trans people is changing. Slowly, but it's changing. And yes, a lot of trans people do have depression or anxiety or other types of mental illness, more so than cis people, definitely. There's statistics, but I don't have them right now. But I don't think being trans is the cause for depression. It's more being trans in our society and transitioning and facing prejudice and discrimination, that's the cause of depression. I mean, let's face it, it's just harder to be trans in our society because, yeah, society sucks. Number 4 is that trans people are trans because they experience some sort of trauma in their childhood. And you know what? I don't know the answer to why trans people are trans. I don't know the answer to why I am trans. But I'm pretty sure that there's never just one reason why people are trans, or just in general why people turn out the way they are. It's always a combination of multiple factors. It can be genetics, it can be your upbringing, it can be trauma. Maybe it is trauma to a certain extent. But I feel like often when people search for some kind of explanation, it's always the easiest to just blame it on childhood trauma and be like, oh yeah, this person never had a permanent father figure in their life, therefore they have to be the father figure for themselves and they are trans. I don't know, I just made this up. Basically, we don't know why people are trans, and even if we did, like, it doesn't change the fact that someone is trans. You can't really therapize someone into not being trans anymore. That's a very, like, no, I wouldn't go there. Number 5 is that trans is a type of sexual orientation and trans people transition so they can be straight. This is a misconception because people used to use the term transsexual to refer to trans people, but that is stupid because it has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with your sexuality. Nowadays we like to use the term transgender because it refers to your gender. And this whole thing about like trans people transition so they can be straight, like, it doesn't make any sense at all. Because people say stuff like, oh yeah, if you're into guys, then why didn't you just stay a girl? Like, it would have been so much easier. No, because I don't want to be a girl. That feels completely wrong. But of course, if you're like in your coming out process, gender and sexuality get a bit intertwined and confusing. For example, when I see a guy, I have to be like, do I want to be with him or do I want to be just like him? Do I, you know, see him as a role model? And the answer is probably both, but that's beside the point. I just wanted to say that your gender identity, so how you feel about your gender and yourself, and your sexual orientation, how you feel about other people, is separate. Number 6, there's just binary trans people, so people either transition from female to male or from male to female. I feel like I don't have to say a lot about that. Basically, gender isn't binary categories, but it's a spectrum. So you can feel completely male or completely female, or you can be somewhere in between, or you can be like there or outside the window. Like, you define your gender. I just wanted to add this point because I feel like non-binary identities are still not being taken seriously by a lot of people, and that sucks. Number 7 is that being trans is just a trend, which it is not. There were trans people all throughout history, but they were erased from history by like straight cis male society. And yes, there's more trans people coming out and transitioning in recent years for sure, but that's because there's more representation and information about trans people, and like, I think society has become a bit more accepting, so people just feel more comfortable coming out because it's not such a big deal anymore. At least it shouldn't be such a big deal anymore. Okay, so my rant is over. I think I could talk about this a lot longer, but I didn't want to make the video too long. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Subscribe to my channel because we're gonna be having a lot of fun here this year. Okay, bye.